Imagine, if you will, those 3 a.m. thoughts about time, space, or the odd and unusual things. These are not your everyday topics. These curiosities about the world and us seem more fiction than fact. This is a journey of enlightenment on subjects that fascinate the mind. Our findings may not change your views or beliefs, but let us share what we have researched along the way. Buckle up as we show you what we've discovered down the rabbit hole.
Hey guys, welcome to What If Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm Terry.
I'm Will.
And today we got an episode that, I'm really excited about. I've been kind of waiting on this one for a little bit. Today we're going to talk about the human origin. And what we mean by human origin is the origin of our species, Homo sapiens sapien, and the different narratives and ideas that are explained by where we come from and who and what we are.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. We kind of referenced this a couple episodes ago. Perhaps you saw it. And if you did, we thank you for that.
Yes, thank you.
And we thank all of our subscribers and even those who don't subscribe and just happen to check it out. Hopefully you find our content interesting.
Yeah. And if you would like, please leave a comment and or an idea even. We gladly look into it, and we're going to try our best to respond to comments accordingly. So please feel free to do so. So
so we're going to talk about what I believe the current term is the anatomically modern human.
Yes, which is you and you and me, probably you, hopefully you. If you're not an anatomically correct human,
let us know in the comments.
Yes,
we want to talk to you
yes,
if you're not.
Please do that. That's fascinating to us. But yeah, anatomically modern humans, AMH, and where hopefully like I said, we're going to address all aspects, at least in a very broad brush sort of way, in a very generalized sort of way, what is told and is talked about in our current world about the origins of humanity and where we come from and who we are.
So I think we kick this thing off. And we will, again, painting with that broad brush, let's look at the religious aspect of creation or the religious narrative.
Okay.
Full disclosure, everyone, this is a broad generalization that is overly simplified of the creation descriptions from the major Western religions.
Yes.
So Christianity, Judaism, and Islam.
Mm-hmm.
I know there are more. I know that there are different interpretations and so on, and we don't mean to offend anyone.
No.
But these are the basic descriptions, and they're all very similar.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, the two major ones popular in the United States, Judaism and Christianity, are describing creation as man, specifically, existing about 6,000 years ago. There's a creator, the Almighty, if you will, whom essentially created man in their image roughly 6,000 years ago. I will say, I did think it was very interesting that in the Quran, Islam, if you will, has a similar and yet different description that could be interpreted that the Almighty caused the Big Bang. Not so much caused as like it was their idea, so to speak.
Let there be light, if you will.
And in addition, the translation to English uses a word for days that has different meanings based on context.
Okay.
So essentially, their understanding, from my understanding of their translation, is in Islam, the world was created in 6 separate periods of time that could range from 100,000 years to 750,000 years to, a year.
Right.
Again, based on context.
Right.
So, again, broad generalization, but they have, very similar stories.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's definitely especially, as it pertains to the Judeo-Christian side of it, because it's the Old Testament. It's something that both Christians and Jews sort of look to. It's kind of all. I think one of the common themes in all of our things is that everything's kind of connected, right? So this is kind of no different. I've always found it a very fascinating story, and it seems like every few years some religious scholar finds a new text that brings new light to it and brings a new what if scenario. And when I went to Catholic school when I was a kid. Full disclosure. And we were taught the story about Adam and Eve.
Right.
And then later I learned about, Adam's first wife, Lilith, who was thrown out of the garden because she was made Adam's equal and he didn't care for that. So Eve was made from one of his ribs, and, Adam and Eve allegedly had 2 sons, Cain and Abel, and Cain killed Abel. And I know your research kind of
Sure
has...
as an ordained minister, I feel like I should probably know something about a lot of different religions.
Right.
Because I don't specialize in any one religion, really.
No.
So I listened to a podcast from a Methodist minister whose name escapes me at the moment.
Okay.
And he had a very interesting interpretation of the Christian creation story, in that I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have this memorized. So if anyone does, please be nice. So in the beginning, it says that God created man.
Right.
Right. And then there was some more stuff described. And then they go into God created Adam in his image.
Right.
And so this preacher's interpretation is that man, as written, when God created man, it was sort of the first try, if you will, and Adam is the chosen one.
Okay.
And that's why he was given the garden, right? And this, it could be, I would say, a different interpretation to the Lilith story, right? Like maybe there wasn't a Lilith or something to that extent, which, again, depending on which version of the Bible you're reading from or learned from, Lilith existed or she didn't exist. But I thought it was an interesting interpretation, which would lead us to believe that we are not all offspring from just 2 people.
Right.
There is, after, the Cain and Abel story, it does go on to essentially, again, simplifying this overly, it goes on to say that Cain wanders the earth until he came across a group of people.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where they came from.
Where did those people come from, right? No, it is, I think a lot of people when they look into, not to dwell on the religious aspect of this story, because there's a lot of it that we're going to cover. And even that is going to be rather generalized and sort of paraphrased, because this is one of those episodes we could probably do 10 episodes out of if we
This
really
is a very
wanted.
deep rabbit hole.
Oh, rabbit holes. Yeah, it's like a golf course, that kind of holes. But yeah, I've always found those stories, the religious aspects of stories of humanity, and like I said, it just seems like, to me, undoubtedly I'm the kind of person who's always been kind of looking for the outsider perspective a lot. I like it when new texts are found and when some new narrative comes about and kind of challenges the old one, and that fascinates me. And it just seems like every few years something like that seems to happen. You got to look for it. You don't. It's not going to be on the front page of the newspaper. Do they even have newspapers anymore? I don't even know.
I think there are still some here and there.
Here and there, yeah. But I'm dating myself. But yeah, it just seems like mainstream media doesn't seem to cover this kind of stuff, and when it comes out. So if you look for it, it's out there. And luckily there's people like us that are fascinated and do look for it.
They do still have history books and science journals.
Yes, they do.
Which is pretty much where the educational facilities teaching evolution are getting their data from.
Right, and even that, as we'll find out here shortly, there's been for quite a long time now a lot of new science about the human origin that's just not being addressed. It's not being talked about, and well, we're gonna get to that, but yeah, there's that being, like you said, painting with a broad brush with the religious ideology about the origin of humans. The parallel ideology is the scientific one that's being taught in schools, ones that I was taught in school, and that's the fact that we are descendants from lower order primates. Darwin's theory of evolution, Darwinism, call it whatever you want, and that we over many years evolved through concepts like adaptive radiation, where we would get this little improvement here and we would capitalize on that, and then another one would come and another. And basically, when I was a kid, I remember my biology teacher, saying to me that man was millions of years in the making. And that was the narrative back then. Of course, back then, well, let me even back that up even more. As we've referenced earlier with the video we did about my interest in the Sasquatch topic, because of that, I got really into physical anthropology at quite a young age. I was about 8 years old the first time I really sat down and got into physical anthropology to learn about, because it is the study of man. And back when I was about 8 years old, the narrative at that time was that Homo sapien was around about 35,000 to 50,000 years. That would have been the early 80s. When I got to high school, which would have been the late 80s, early 90s, I had, the textbooks then were saying 50 to 100,000 years. Okay. Nowadays, it is kind of a general accepted consensus due to the genetic research that has been done, decoding human genome, things like that, and the physical evidence we have that we've been on this planet 200,000 years, possibly 300,000 years, possibly longer. There's evidence that we've been around a very, very, very long time. But right now, they're in that 200,000, 300,000 year ballpark. They're definitely sure we were around that long. And what I'm about to say is my opinion, 100%. It's an opinion, okay? But think about that in a nutshell. We've been here for at least 200,000 years, and the narrative states that the current narrative states that we really didn't do anything until about 6,000 years ago. And to me, knowing what I know about humanity and knowing what we've done even in just the last few hundred years, can you imagine if we just would have, got off our asses 200,000 years ago and done something? I mean, we might have been walking on the moon, 100,000 years ago, right? I mean, I guess what I'm getting at in a very sarcastic way is I find it very, very difficult to believe that humanity did nothing for about 194,000 years on this planet, according to the narrative. And there's a lot of different ideas and a lot of different opinions and a lot of different, there's evidence even to suggest that that was not the case. But just for food for thought, I'm throwing my opinion out there, and I really have a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that human beings, anatomically modern humans, did nothing for almost 200 millennia. It just seems...
So, what would you say if I told you that everything you were taught in school, everything you thought you knew about the origin of humans as we know them, was either incorrect or at least incomplete?
I would believe... Well, I know that's true.
I mean, we're gonna get into this, but I think it's interesting you said that we could have been on the moon 100,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. What if we were?
We could have been. It's
I'm going to be
crazy.
upfront with you. That's definitely going to be a different episode because this is going to be a broad stroke over this information. Mm-hmm. But there's definitely some juicy details in here.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So about that 6,000 years that we just started.
Yeah.
From the current narrative, we're looking at Sumeria is basically what we're taught. Mm-hmm. That's when modern civilization as we know it started.
The cradle, they believe the cradle of civilization, it is called.
Yeah, right.
Tigris, Euphrates River Valley in Iraq. Modern day Iraq. Yeah.
Moving forward from there, that was like 5,500 years ago, essentially. Ancient Egypt was 5,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. The Indus Valley was 4,500 years ago. Ancient Greece, I mean, it's kind of weird to think about it because we know so much about the ancient Greeks. That was only 3,500 years ago.
Right.
It seems like so much further. Mm-hmm. Rome was 3,000 years ago.
Right.
The Mayans, 2,500 years ago.
Right.
It seemed like they were such more of an ancient culture.
And very knowledgeable.
Right.
Unbelievably knowledgeable people.
So, I mean, with that narrative, I could totally see how, the theory of evolution holds water. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure. And yeah, I mean, the theory of evolution is something that basically states that evolution is something that takes a long time to happen. It's not... You know what I mean? That was Darwin's idea of it. I mean, it takes a long time, and then there's a mutation that occurs, and that if that mutation is a successful one and it is useful to the organism, that organism capitalizes on that and gets stronger and becomes more adaptive. And, we were always told humans were the most adaptive animal on the planet. That's why we rule it. You know what I mean? Look what we've done, and like I said, in the last couple hundred years alone, technological advances, I mean, that's something a lot of people don't realize that, if you go back, I mean, it's 2022 right now as we're recording this.
Indeed.
And when you realize that just 150 years ago, just go back 150 years, okay? Which in geologic time is less than nothing. It's nothing, okay? But even in our, as far as human lifetimes go, I mean, that's like 2 human lifetimes, basically, okay? We didn't have airplanes 150 years ago. We might have had... no, we didn't actually, now that I think about it. We didn't even have automobiles yet, okay? We didn't have a telephone yet. Alexander Graham Bell didn't quite have it there yet. Basically, so many things that we have today did not exist just 150 years ago. And in 150 years, not only do we have the power of flight now, we have airplanes, and we have the ability to go into outer space. We have space shuttles. We've landed on the moon, and we've done, we have all this technology. We have computers. We have all this communications technology. We have, we have just look. I mean,
technology itself just seems to grow in leaps and bounds.
Absolutely, and it's really unbelievable what's happened in the last 150 years. Now, keep in mind, anatomically modern humans, that's what you and I are. Okay. Pardon my poor language here. But that's what we are. And if you think about human beings being basically the same for the last 200,000 years, it's kind of just odd that we're only as far along as we are, seeing what we could do in 150 years. We had at least 200,000. So, once again, my opinion, there's something definitely odd about that. We'll just say that. I'm just going to say that for right now.
Well, fun fact for you. In 2010, in Peru, they discovered another city that is older than Sumeria.
Right.
It is called Caral. I think that's how you pronounce it. It is actually thought to have collapsed 5,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Like that was the end. And it existed there. They are speculating it existed up to 2,000 years before that. So, I mean, we're talking about modern humans, anatomically modern humans, over 7,000 years ago.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So, I also wanted to bring this up while we're going down the history thereof before we get really into like all the fun facts that I know you've researched. The oldest civilization that we are aware of currently is, I need to make sure I actually pronounce this correctly. It is Göbekli Tepe
Yeah.
in southern Turkey. That there was another archaeologist who was told about this. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but essentially he was told about this civilization. He came up, he found some pottery, he dated it, and he said, "You know what? That doesn't make sense. There's no way this pottery is that old in this area because humans didn't exist then." So he chose not to continue that pursuit. And then a Russian archaeologist by the name of Klaus Schmidt came in the 1990s and again looked at the pottery, dated the pottery, and went, "Wow, this shouldn't be here. We need to look further." And so digging into this, it looks to be intentionally buried. So this is a series of temples, and it seems to be intentionally buried about 8,000 years ago.
Yeah.
As far as I know, there's actually still excavating it. A lot of the information they've acquired through ground penetrating radar. But again, they're still working on excavating, and they are looking at it currently to have been in full swing, existed since 11,300 to 11,500 years ago.
Wow. That's
And
amazing.
they're speculating that once it's completely unearthed, it is entirely possible that this civilization existed over 13,000 years ago.
That's amazing. It was about maybe 2-3 years ago, and I was watching a documentary and it was in the Czech Republic. And there was for years, there's just been this great big hill in the Czech Republic, and people always thought, oh, wow, it's kind of odd shaped for, a hill or whatever. Nobody thought anything of it. It was covered in grass and trees and everything. And a few years ago, there was an excavation done on that hill, and there's a reason why that hill is odd, because it's not a hill. It's an actual pyramid in the Czech Republic. And archaeologists at that point, now I have not heard anything recently, but at that particular time, I want to say it was about maybe 4 years ago, it was thought that this pyramid could be up to 15,000 years old.
I could totally believe that.
In the Czech Republic, a pyramid.
Well, so there is an interesting archaeological site that is off the coast of India. And here's what's really interesting. This is a full-on city. Pyramids, houses, like the whole shebang,
Hmm.
right? Something we would probably see, in some of the, I will say, major but older Indian cities, except for it's underwater.
Hmm.
And it's like pristine. So either somebody decided they were going to build this underwater, or it was completely submerged when the ocean levels rose,
Right.
which is over 12,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age.
Right. Hmm. Well, that's kind of the narrative of the old Atlantis narrative too. I mean,
Sure.
Atlanteans, had a, you know, they called it a continent. I don't really know that it was that big, uh, but they had a civilization that was engulfed by the sea and taken up by the sea. And there's all different ideas and theories about where it is, and that's something that everybody talks about. But in the same vein as that, Atlanteans come up a lot in when you talk about these old texts about where we come from. There's a lot of talk about Atlanteans and things like that, and their extraterrestrial origins and whatnot. Really fascinating stuff, especially if you're into UFOs and ETs and stuff like that. It's very interesting. Very interesting.
Another rabbit hole we're probably going to dive down at some
Oh,
point.
sure. I'd say almost definitely.
So I know you have a lot of stuff that you really want to talk about,
Yes,
but to lead into that, I want to throw out. Are you familiar with out of place artifacts?
I've heard there are some artifacts out there that are just absolutely mind blowing.
So, out of place artifacts, if you're not familiar with it, folks, are artifacts that are found in layers of rock that don't make any sense. Like they should not be in the layer of rock that they were discovered. So, essentially, as time marches on and dirt and plant life and everything get compressed, compacted, eventually turn into stone, the higher levels of stone closer to the surface are younger, deeper in are obviously older,
Hmm.
and they've found some really interesting stuff over the years. So I think one of the more interesting ones is and I'm going to butcher this name, I know I am. It is the Antikythera mechanism, which is probably not at all how you pronounce that. But essentially, some divers in 1901 found this off the coast of Crete, and it appears like they've dated it to over 2,000 years old. It's a mechanical device, like made out of brass.
Wow.
That, I mean, like very intricate stuff, almost like clockwork
Hmm.
kind of thing. And they believe that it's used to calculate the position of the sun, the moon, various planets, and even keep track of the dates of the Olympic Games. Here's a local U.S. one that I thought was interesting. This one was from 1934 in London, Texas. They found a hammer, basically a sledgehammer, embedded in the rock. Like you could clearly see the head and the wooden handle that by now is petrified, essentially. But they've dated this to be roughly 100 million years old.
Wow. That's the
So,
age of the dinosaurs.
yeah.
That's like Cretaceous. Yeah, Cretaceous that would be, I think, or early Cretaceous or late Jurassic. I
So
don't.
they also in California in 1961 they have discovered what I'll refer to as an ancient spark plug. This thing again buried in the rock, dated to between 100 to 500,000 years old, and it functions almost the exact same way.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
I think the one I'm most excited about, and this is why I said, what if we did make it to the moon 100,000 years ago?
Hmm.
In northern Russia, they found a rock that this rock is dated to 225 to 250 million years old. Embedded in this rock is really what appears to be a microchip.
Wow.
Like, it really should not exist.
Right. Definitely. And that's fascinating too. If I could just interject for 1 second.
Sure.
For a lot of people that are going, now, how is there a mic? Like, come on. Here's a little something a lot of people don't know. We believe that the universe is about 13.5 billion years old. That's the current idea.
Narrative.
That's the current idea, okay? And NASA has recently come out and said that they believe that there are millions of planets with intelligent life like ours in the universe, just using their own mathematical algorithms to figure that out. And some of these planets have a billion-year head start on us. A billion years, okay? So just think about that, okay? If a civilization with intelligent life like ours had a billion-year head start on us, it is entirely plausible that, 200 billion years ago, they had the power and the technology to come to planet Earth.
Sure. In northern New Mexico in 1987, they unearthed a perfect, anatomically modern human footprint.
Ooh.
And I mean, this is pristine.
Mm-hmm.
And they dated it to 290 million years ago.
That's smack dab in the middle of the Mesozoic, or the age of reptiles, folks. That's dinosaur territory. And you know what the funny thing is? During our research for this episode, I came across a few people. Now, this is not by any means verified, but there were people of scientific backgrounds that I found that have sworn that they have seen data, physical evidence, that a race of Homo sapiens like us existed during the age of the dinosaurs. Once again, that is not concrete. That is not peer-reviewed data. That is scientific people who are looking into this type of stuff said that there is physical data, and hey, there
Fun
it is.
fact, it's funny that you use the word concrete. I really should have wrote this one down because it's really interesting that I don't remember where, but it's definitely in the U.S. And this gentleman, again, unearthed another human footprint, like anatomically modern human,
Mm-hmm.
and directly behind the footprint, there's multiple footprints, I should say, right? Like it has the offset, like they were traversing.
Right.
And behind that are three-toed, like clawed footprints,
Right.
as in a large reptile.
Right.
And I will say that it's been speculated that it's a hoax, that he faked it.
Mm-hmm.
According to this gentleman, where he unearthed this is literally, it was on a riverbed, and there is a shelf, like a newer rock shelf that was sitting just on top of it. Like, in order to carve this out, he would literally have to remove that shelf to get to it to carve it out.
Mm-hmm.
And they have tested it and peer reviewed it, and it is not clean enough to be carved.
Right.
Like, this was literally imprinted in the mud and petrified.
Mm-hmm. And that's it. We've been finding, you could Google this. It's everywhere. We've been finding dinosaur trackways for decades. And the most famous one, I remember when I was young, I saw this because I'm kind of a dinosaur nerd myself, a trackway that they found in England. And it is of a theropod dinosaur, a biped, like a velociraptor or something. But it's a theropod. And they found a trackway of it walking towards the cliff, and then, the trackway stops because the cliff goes away, and then there's the Atlantic. Mm-hmm. Okay. They picked the trackway up across the other side in Massachusetts So where the plates and the Earth split and Europe and North America came apart,
Right.
the trackways have some of the trackways in England and some of it's in Massachusetts. It's really rad. It's really cool. So we've been finding stuff like that for years. So it's really not that uncommon to find dinosaur trackways. It is uncommon to find human trackways with the dinosaur trackways, very much so.
For sure.
Yeah,
So
that's
let me
awesome.
ask you this.
Yes.
Because I know you've been doing a lot of this research. According to Darwin, we essentially evolved from great apes. And I know somebody's going to point this out, maybe not. But anyway, one of the arguments against it, so to speak, is that great apes have more chromosomes than we do.
Right.
Do you know why?
Do I know why great apes have more chromosomes than us?
Yes.
I not really. Not that I can explain scientifically.
So I actually do because I looked into it.
Good. I'm glad.
So I will say the matching chromosome, one of the matching chromosomes that we have with great apes, they have two, I will say, portions, which essentially is an extra chromosome, right? And what's really interesting is we also have those same two chromosomes, but ours are fused together.
Right.
And the interesting, what I think is super interesting about it is when they were fused together, it's, and I know you know this, it's chromosome number 2.
Yes.
When they fused together, whenever that happened, each of those chromosomes, because science has actually looked into them, there is overlapping data. So each chromosome from the great ape controls the similar things, right? In modern humans, when they fuse together, the overlapping data seems to have been removed.
Yes.
So there is no, we'll call it duplicates.
No.
And I thought that was super interesting.
It's very interesting. To me, in my research, when we talk about human chromosome number 2, that's one of the several smoking guns in the human genome that states basically that, well, I'll get to that. Basically, human chromosome number 2 has a gene in it called the FOXP2 gene, and it's in all mammals, FOXP2, and it's very stable in all mammals, except for us. And it's the reason why they're calling it unstable is because, as Will was stating before, this chromosome has been heavily modified. And by modified, it's been, like Will said, parts of it have been taken out, parts of it have been fused, parts of it are kind of like the classic double helix thing, you know, the twisty ladder, as a lot of people call it. That is our DNA. It has some missing pieces. It has parts that are just deleted and fused together. And the fascinating thing about that, well, first let me just say this about the FOXP2 gene. This is the gene that is kind of what makes us essentially who we are, because this gene was intentionally modified. And this is peer-reviewed science, folks. This is my opinion. This is peer-reviewed science. It's been modified to give us the ability to have speech, that the speech that we have, complex speech, to have conversations. It basically made it so that our tongues would be the way they are so we can speak. Our jaws would be able to move the way they can move so we can speak. And even our act of singing. We're the only mammal, well, that sings articulate like we do. You might argue, what do you mean whales sing and dolphins sing and all that? They do, but that's more of a communication thing. We're the only ones who could actively like create musical notes with our mouth and our throat and our tongues. This gene was intentionally manipulated for this purpose. That's the first smoking gun. And by the way, we know that it's been manipulated because when you talk about fused genes cannot and do not occur in nature. They are not a product of evolution. As we were saying before, evolution is something that takes a long time to do. This happened relatively quickly. They don't have an exact number
Right.
on how long it took, but it was relatively quick, like within a few generations, most likely. So this was not something that natural selection or adaptive radiation or Darwinism was responsible for in any way, shape, or form. And also, the overlap between us and our, shall we say, nearest or closest genetic peers, the Neanderthals at the time, believe it or not, we are so different from them. Neanderthals did not have this modification. They did not have the ability that we have. And we lived alongside of these people for tens of thousands of years. We even interbred with them. In fact, it is a medical fact that if you are a white person of European descent, you can have up to 2% Neanderthal DNA in you to this day. Excuse me. And that's the first smoking gun. And just in case there's a little bit of denial still left there, they had some folks that are much smarter than me at MIT, probability statistic people, very, very, the best in the world at probability and statistics, do the math on what kind of odds would it be that this rather highly irregular thing could happen naturally. And they did. And it came out that it would be 1 in 10 to the 80th power. That's 1 in 10 with 80 zeros after that 10. Okay? That's the odds it would be that this would occur naturally. Now, just so we have context here, these same probability statistics people said once you get to 1 in 10 to the 40th power, which is half of that, it's considered mathematically impossible. It can't happen. So it's double impossible that this happened because of evolution or adaptive radiation or anything like that. We were modified. Now, who did the modifying? That's anybody's guess. That's anybody's guess. But it is a peer-reviewed scientific fact that anatomically modern humans were a product of some sort of modification and genetic engineering. That's the first smoking gun. Any questions?
No, but I'm pretty sure you just made a lot of religious people extremely happy. And they're probably calling all their friends right now, going, see, I told you.
Yeah, it's probably not happening. Anyway, the other smoking gun, and this was something that I learned in my research because I had known about number 2, human chromosome number 2 for a while. In fact, we've known it for a while. Through my research, I found out that they found this modification in us as early as 1991. The first peer-reviewed paper was written on this in 1991. That's 31 years ago. And yet we're still teaching that we're descendants from, not that we're not. We do have relic DNA from other primates, obviously. That's the basic makeup of it. We've just been modified. We got souped up. Anyway,
What else you got?
this one's fascinating to me because everybody knows Terry likes the woo a little bit, and this kind of ties into some of the woo stuff that I'm a proponent of. Human chromosome number 7 was also modified. Okay, it was also modified, and what human chromosome number 7 does is it's basically, I hope I'm in front of my mic here. It's basically our ability to feel emotion. It basically allows us to chemically feel things like sympathy, sadness, empathy, things of that nature. It basically gives us the characteristics of what we would say are human. We're able to feel bad for people and other animals. We have, it basically gives us what we would call, we have a heart. You know what I mean? Like we're compassionate individuals. The other thing it does, it gives us this wonderful imagination that we have. this very vivid thing that we use to create. And let's be honest, folks, we're the first creature that we know of on this planet to have this type of imagination that we have, because all things start with imagination, right? I mean, you can't build it or create it until you think of it, right? Until you see that picture in your mind of what you want it to be.
That's true.
And that was another modification. Another thing I found out fascinating, not so much to do with the origin, but with the modification, is we have these structures in our genes called telomeres. They're also called the longevity genes. They basically are a telltale sign of how long a person's going to live.
Okay.
And these telomeres have also been fused, and they've been capped on the ends. They kind of look like weird-looking X's. And the ends of the X's, however long they are, basically is an indicator of a person or animal's lifespan. Everything has telomeres. Every animal has telomeres. And ours are capped. And they're capped in a way that they were fused and modified to be capped. So basically, our age was predetermined by the modifier and controlled so that basically we, at one point, most likely lived a lot longer, and this modification shortened our lives. Now, the interesting thing about that is that the scientists that looked into it said that a human being, if there wasn't things like, all things being equal, like our bodies were in perfect condition and, everything ran perfectly, and the viruses weren't, we didn't have the viruses and the disease.
Basically, if we weren't trying to destroy ourselves.
Right. We would live about 120 years with the genetic material, with the telomeres we have. And another interesting experiment, I was speaking to you earlier about this, was they actually took lab mice and they messed with their telomeres. And what they did was lab mice also have caps on their telomeres, and they removed the caps, don't ask me how, but they did, to see if it would affect the longevity of mice. Now, lab mice, if we don't kill them, that is, live typically about 2, maybe 3 years at max. And these mice lived over a decade.
Wow.
So like 4 times longer. So, let's say the average human lives 75, 80 years. I mean, imagine you could live to be 300 years old. I mean, like it or hate it, that's...
So, along those lines, I would like to comment on that.
Mm-hmm.
I watch a YouTube channel that it's kind of like Bizarre Foods was, but I want to say it's called The Best Food Show on YouTube or on the internet or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this gentleman did a show in Pakistan, in northern Pakistan, like in the Himalayas area.
Mm-hmm.
And these people lived, like on average, they lived to be well over 100.
Right.
110. I think the oldest one was 130, if I recall the episode correctly.
Right.
And the part I thought was very interesting about that is, one, they do not, because they're mountain people, they don't buy anything. They grow everything.
Right.
So they are the epitome of organic and non-GMO and so on.
Oh, sure.
Most of their diet, and I would say a solid 90 to 95% of their diet, is buckwheat flour and apricot.
There's a lot of interesting aspects with that. I recently saw this when I was doing my research for this thing. It was unconnected, really, but it was a separate rabbit hole. But it's fascinating you bring it up. The fact that we are bipedal is that our brains have switched from the relic genetic material in our DNA, which comes from arboreal primates like chimpanzees, things like that. They're used to hanging in trees, and they spend just as much time in trees as they do on the ground.
Sure.
When you become bipedal, you kind of say goodbye to that tree thing, and you keep your feet on the ground, and you move forward. Now, that causes a shift, they say, in the brain to constantly be moving forward. We have binocular vision, which is constantly looking forward. So our brain constantly wants us to move forward, walking. And they say that because of that, they did experiments, because a lot of people nowadays have very sedentary lives. You work in an office, you work in a cubicle, you sit at a desk for a bunch of hours a day, or you sit at a table working on something or something like that. There is now a correlation between people who walk a certain amount every day and who are active a certain amount every day, and people who aren't, with degenerative brain diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia. If you get up and walk every day, and you take a significant effort to get up and walk every day, you are far less likely to get Alzheimer's or dementia. Your brain needs you to move. You know, your eyes need you to keep moving. So I guess
I feel like we're going to cover that more in detail on another episode.
Folks, just real quick, go out and take a walk every day. If you're somebody who sits around a lot, you know, unless you're not a mailman or you do what I do, I walk about 15,000 steps a day, and what I do for a living. Get out and walk. Greg Braden always says, in every culture he's ever visited, they all say the same thing: movement is medicine. I agree. Get out and move. Science agrees. Get out and move. Take a walk.
Agreed. 100%. I know we didn't get near as far as you really wanted to, but I feel like we have painted a okay, even decent picture with these broad brushes. And I think we should...
It's a good start. It's a tip of the iceberg.
100%. And we will be back to go deeper in this rabbit hole.
I believe so. Probably several times.
Definitely. So until next time, if you enjoyed this content, we're going to ask that you like it, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you get notified when we post new episodes.
And if you have any ideas, please comment. Let us know. We'd love to look into it.
And we'll see you next time on What If Down the Rabbit Hole.
See ya.
We've tried our best to provide all perspectives on these topics. If this type of content speaks to you or interests you, please subscribe to get notified when new episodes are released. Check out the show notes for all the references discussed. Do your own research, formulate your own opinion. Join us next time on What If Down the Rabbit Hole.